Kia ora, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen A, where we wrap the week's current affairs with the best political team on television from a very Auckland perspective. Warning, we're as fair and balanced as Fox News. Joining me tonight on my revolving panel of bloggers and Auckland opinion shapers, she's a lecturer at the Department of Film, Television and Media Studies at the University of Auckland. She confuses most New Zealand men by wearing lipstick and having a brain. Digital feminist and blogger Phoebe Fletcher. Founding member of the Devonport Militia, whose motto is recycle or death. The hardest working member of the Labour Party, not currently inside the caucus. Social media guru and commentator David Slack. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, issue 1. We can't borrow for KiwiSaver, but can borrow $120 million per week for tax cuts. Who knew Smile and Wave political capital could let you get away with so much? Issue 2, the Tai Tokerau by-election has been announced with Hone's resignation from Parliament and the formal setting up of Mana. Labour and the Māori Party are fielding candidates. Let's get ready to rumble. Issue 3 tonight. Asian invasion pamphlets dropped off in Auckland suburbs, and white supremacists plan to march up Queen Street a day before the general election. Anyone else feel like they've woken up at a Klan rally wearing an I Love Glee t-shirt? And we'll end the show on a final word, but let's kick things off with issue 1. John Key is softening the country up for cuts to KiwiSaver, working for families and student loans, while lining up the privatisation of our assets, and he couldn't be more popular. Phoebe, doesn't this show how clever John Key is? The 40% of New Zealand who earn less than $20,000 per year will be hurt most by these policies, yet the sleepy hobbits of New Zealand love John Key. He's going to get away with this, isn't he?
Oh, I think the game has changed significantly since the last couple of weeks, and I think that Key is going to be attacked more and more on economic policy, not only through having Brashen, of course, in charge of ACT, but also with the launch of the Mana Party that represents that constituency. In terms of working for families and KiwiSaver, I would say that it's actually really the middle that is going to feel that the most. I think a lot of you know, the very poor in New Zealand don't necessarily understand the taxation laws or know how to use those policies. So, but this, of course, becomes an issue in that, you know, with the last economic recession, part of the issue was an accumulation of wealth at the top and not enough money circulating through the economy. We need, as a nation, to encourage people to save. There is clearly an issue with taking away that incentive and focusing all the tax cuts on spending.
But middle class New Zealand love John Key. He comes out, he smiles, he's a bit of a, you know, a geeky dad routine, and they lap it up. They lap it up.
Well, I think, you know, this is an issue of not many people actually reading policies, and, you know...
Well, that was what the 2008 election was about, wasn't it? People didn't read the policy.
This is a classic JFK-Nixon, you know, issue on the effect of kind of televisuality, I guess, on politics. But I think, as I say, I think that, you know, the last couple of weeks have changed the game significantly, and, you know, this is essentially going to become a Hone versus kind of Brash show for the next couple of months, which is certainly going to force some more debate.
David, we can't borrow for KiwiSaver, but we can borrow $120 million per week for tax cuts. Walk me through this. How does it work? Explain it to me.
I think Phoebe's right. The fact that the argument has been given a JFK Nixon blush means that nobody ever gets walked through that, and that's why it works. Because if anybody was actually given in clear and simple terms the explanation that, look, the one thing that we really need is savings, and we were spending money on that, but we're going to cut it. The one thing we don't really need is tax cuts, but we're going to not cut. We're not going to pull back on that, and we're borrowing to do it. And if you know, the frustration for me is, as Phoebe says, you've got this Don and Hone sideshow that's probably going to monopolise the debate. But what you've also got, that the contest that ought to be taking place is in the middle between the two middle ground parties, where there's a clear explanation of these problems and the reason why this government is being unduly simplistic and potentially taking us off the road. Because, you know, they look always for the most simplistic answer, and their solution here is cut, cut, cut. And suck up, suck up, suck up. And the sucking up here is principally in the form of the tax cuts.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing, you talked about Key's genius, and you're right, it is genius in making it so simplistic that it seems entirely plausible to people that he says, oh look, we can't afford it, we'd love to, it's nice to have, all of that stuff.
Yeah, runs that nice
and it all works. Cunliffe made a release, possibly a speech to accompany it yesterday, I'm not sure, but it had some excellent rebuttal of a few of the key figures that keep getting thrown around. For example, the fact that the argument that government had grown 40% in the last 5 years demonstrates that's not true. It's actually about 20% if you account for the actual growth of the economy.
Sure.
He demonstrates that when they talk about putting on an army of public servants, they were in fact it was mostly teachers and frontline people. And each one of them, their lies, and he rebuts them. And I think we need to see more of Cunliffe in this election, debunking and being as crisp and as clear as he can be about it, because the simple fact is they are trying a prescription that will slow down the economy rather than give it momentum at the very moment when it's needed most.
Well, let's talk about that. Phoebe, instead of fighting the issues of public service cutbacks, Labor are wasting our time with baseless BMW donation smears, repainting government house nonsense and bitching about key security costs. When will Labor get back to the actual issues that matter?
Oh, I think this is, primarily an issue of being in opposition, I guess, on the back foot and, having to be reactive rather than proactive. I think Labor certainly need to, and Whale Oil and I were actually talking about this the other day.
That's right.
There needs to be some kind of simplification, I guess, of their approach and the way that they explain these things to people. I think, if you jump on the feedback, for example, for interest.co.nz, you can see quite visibly that there is, a growing discontent among those middle classes, because we had the GST rise, and this has actually stifled consumption a little bit. So it's actually slowing down the economy, and we're seeing that these cuts that National have made are not necessarily having the results that they were anticipated to. And I think this is really going to start crunching those people in the middle and provide Labor with an opportunity for strong attack before the election.
That's a good point, isn't it, David? Because I mean, the real story here is about National Party economic incompetence. The economy was in decline well before the second Christchurch earthquake. Bill English described his GST tax rise, which subsidised a tax cut for the wealthiest New Zealanders, as turbocharging the economy. It has in fact led to a $1 billion deficit in our tax revenue. This is National's mistake, and we're paying for it, aren't we?
Yeah, dead right we are. And in the 90s they said that tax cuts were going to turbocharge the economy, and they didn't. They said that it was going to lead to greater investment. It didn't. It's a joke. It doesn't work that way. You can try and juggle it around, but the fact is, you need a certain amount of money to keep the machinery of government rolling and the well-being of the whole country adequately nourished. And if you try and pull that away, doesn't happen immediately, but in the longer term it does. You actually start to dismantle all of the things that hold your society together, and you lose economic momentum.
Right.
Because at a time like this, you actually need to have government priming the pump. If you don't believe in Keynesian economics, then you're never going to accept this. But the fact is, it works, and that's. It's partly because of the mineral boom in Australia that they're doing well, but it's also because they took a Keynesian approach, and our one over here said, no, that's too rich for our blood, we can do it with cuts.
Well, I think even National recognise this, because they haven't completely abolished KiwiSaver. They've taken cuts to it. The problem is that it disincentivises people to invest. We might see those costs pushed more onto the employer, and as Bernard Hickey was saying, they're basically saying we encourage you to save more. What's going to stop people basically putting that money into the housing market and creating another kind of bubble? It is problematic.
Question to both of you. This public service kneecapping comes alongside the sale of assets. Would a brash Key government, in your opinion, privatise beyond the 50% National have staked out? Would they? I mean, John Key and the argument at the moment is, we're only selling 50%, so it's not, it's not going the full hog. Would a brash Key government have it all gone by lunchtime?
A brash Key government would love to see that happen. But the stupid thing is, there's actually not the saving in it that they propose there is. Especially when you're selling assets that are yielding 7 and 8 and 9% in order to meet your cost of borrowing of 5%. That's dumb maths. And the more you look at it, the more you have, you simply cannot avoid the conclusion that there are only two groups of people who benefit from this. One are the people who clip the ticket when this thing goes. The lawyers and the brokers, they love
Simon
this
Power's
stuff.
going to go work for.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah, they love that stuff. I mean, they live for it, and they're just drooling, waiting for these things to come out. That's the one group. The other group is whoever gets to buy it at a good rate.
Yeah. He's talking about we'll get $10 billion out of these sales. That's an optimistic look. We're borrowing $1 billion a month at the moment. All we're going to get out of this is 10 months worth of borrowing, aren't we?
Well, I mean, this is the issue, and the problem is at the moment that we are so globalised that we are much more dependent on the global economy than, you know, to a certain extent, the small manoeuvres that we do in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Like, if you talk about, you know, the American economists looking at the possibility of a double-dip recession, they are watching the Middle East and North Africa very closely at the moment. If you look at some of the things that could potentially cause that double-dip recession, it's things like problems in Nigeria. Well, they've just had 500 people dead since their voting has begun. So, you know, to a certain extent, these issues are out of our control, you know. There is a tsunami in Japan, you know, all of a sudden Japanese investment in New Zealand drops. Of course, who we know that, you know, Housewives invested significantly in New Zealand. So I think, you know, there is an argument that we do need to keep national control of some of these assets, because if it's only, you know, small numbers, we're not going to have those assets in the long term to try and make money off.
Question to both of you: who wins, who loses by cutting KiwiSaver? Who wins, who loses?
People who on low incomes lose. People on high incomes do better. Right. Simple as that. It's a really unfair treatment.
Who wins, who loses?
Well, I would have to agree with David, although I would say that it's not really so much the low-income people. I think it's, you know, people just slightly higher in the middle that are going to lose, that know how to use those policies.
Right.
I think there's still a lot of low-income people without the kind of access to education, or don't necessarily know how to institute some of those schemes into their lives.
Moving on, issue 2, the Taitokerau by-election is up and running with Hone's resignation from Parliament and the registration of Mana all completed. The Māori Party and Labour Party are running candidates. Let's get ready to rumble. Phoebe, judging by the animosity building between the Māori Party and the Māori Party sellouts and the Righteous Māori Party heroes, Fair and Balanced Fox News, how angry will this by-election get, and will the truce not to stand Mana candidates and Māori electorates in the general election hold? Thoughts?
I don't think the truce is going to hold at all. I think that the claws are out now, and just watch this space. I mean, it's going to be very, very difficult, I guess, for the Māori Party or even Labour to run someone against Hone, I think, in that electorate. I mean, I wasn't at the Ngāpuhi hui the other day, so I don't know, but you know, there were allegations that there were kind of, you know, less than 20 people at that hui from representing Ngāpuhi. So I think you know, the claws are out, and it's going to be a difficult seat to run against. Yeah.
David, Labour Party strategists have quietly suggested that this isn't an electorate they actually want to win if Mana is able to gain extra MPs at the general election, especially if they go on to split votes in the Māori electorates, allowing Labour to win them back. How hard will Labour fight for this by-election?
In other words, is Te Taitokerau their Epsom?
Yeah.
Kelvin Davis seems to be quite excited about it all the same, coming through the middle. Look, I think I've got a couple of observations to make. The first is, I think it's going to be really hard to predict just what happens here. I think there are a lot of variables in there. Hone has a terrific constituency up there, but it's also skewed towards the young, and getting out the vote amongst the young is harder.
That's right.
So that militates against it. You've also got the possibility that Brass Hone sideshow that Phoebe mentioned before plays for all these months. That could maybe it could work to his advantage, but it could also alienate. It's all, and especially because he's unpredictable. He's, you know,
bless him. Bless him. His unpredictability keeps me up
who knows what he'll do. Having said all that, you're quite right. It could be beneficial to Labour to have other partners in there, because you get your double bang for your buck with a small representation under MMP.
That's right.
And boy, is this ever going to come down to maths this time.
That's right.
Because I expect, having just said you can't predict anything, I reckon National loses about 5% bleeding off to
the
Don.
right, to the hard right.
But because of that, it also loses 5% bleeding off to the middle from people who voted for that nice Mr. Key, who wasn't like that scary Mr. Brash, who now see that he's in there, so they'll leave.
And will that go to the Greens or Labor, or you think
I think it's more likely to go to the Greens, but it also depends on what Labor does between here and there to start looking like something more like an opposition.
Sure.
I'd be surprised if the Green vote doesn't lift.
Yes.
But all of this says, you know, it's really hard to say. The one thing I do think you can say with certainty is National probably gets pulled under 50%, so it can't govern alone. So all of the MMP computations then come into play.
Sure,
so then it becomes really interesting to say who gets what and where, and what their tiny little percentages are, or if they get bowled out altogether.
Question to both of you: what do each of the candidates need to do to connect with the voters of one of the poorest regions in New Zealand?
Oh, I don't know, it's a hard one because I think that the Mana Māori split has really split Māori as well.
Right.
And so I definitely think that there are those within Māori that feel there is kind of some threat with Mana and the Unionists and sort of these left concerns, I guess, pulling away attention from Māori concerns. And if you do look back through the last few elections, you do see that Māori do become this kind of push and pull linchpin. Like they tend to have less unemployment under Labor, but they tend to get more concessions under National. So I think it's going to be difficult. I think in terms of Kelvin Davis's maiden speech, right, where he said, you know, we need to stop looking at grievances. I think they've got treaty claims going through at the moment, so that'll be interesting to see how that is received within that region.
What are they going to do? What are the candidates going to do?
What do they have to do? Well, I think you go back to that point we were making earlier on about articulating the economic argument to make clear just what the hell has to happen here. I think that'd be really useful, especially in an area like the north where there's so much unemployment.
That's right. That's right.
What the hell are you going to do to fix this? You know, where are the good ideas? Now, that's not really Hone's agenda so much as saying, whatever you do, just don't vote for those two people over there. And that's not an invalid argument, because that's a start.
Question to both of you: how credible is it for Peter Sharples to claim he can work with Don Brash, a man who wants to eliminate the very electorate seats Peter currently holds? How credible is that for the Māori Party?
I guess to some Māori that is credible, to others it's not. I mean, if you look, you know, for example, down the east coast there's a lot of anger at the Petrobras explorations. So, you know, to some Māori that is a credible discussion, because I think for those people they don't trust either National or Labor. It's kind of like the worst of two evils, or lesser of two evils, and who they can work with the most. I think it's a really difficult one. It's really going to split voters.
Can Peter Sharples sound credible and talk about a deal with Brash, who wants to actually get rid of the actual seat that he's sitting in?
Well, he's shown remarkable Zen-like calm in dealing with people who he really shouldn't be in the same room with.
He's like Yoda.
He is. So yeah, I think he could probably find some way to soothe, calm down poor old Don, and Don will keep singing his Article 3 song like that's the only article of the treaty.
That's right. That's right.
And they might sort of be harmonious for a while, but in the end, I just don't see it working, because, well, no, the only way it works is if Don decides he's not actually all that worried about this stuff and he cares more about the economics. And that's actually possible. You know, I think for all that he pretends he's all het up about this race issue and one law for all, I don't think he really believes it. I think what he really believes, and unfortunately he's wrong about this too, is that you need a Hayek prescription applied to the New Zealand economy. That's completely wrong.
That's right.
That's another thing.
Question to both of you. Some of the extraordinary racism on the anti-Hone Facebook protest groups make Kyle Chapman look like a gay-friendly Green Party voting vegan. Have either of you been surprised by the undercurrent of political violence articulated on these sites?
No, absolutely not. And I think that Māori and the race issue becomes a push-pull issue every election, and that's why it's evoked so easily all the time by both Labor and National. Sorry, David.
Pretty venal, isn't it?
It perturbs me so much. I've written 2 books.
Yes, of course,
of course. Okay, who wins, who loses with the by-election?
Again, I think it's an opportunity for Hone to prove his constituency.
Yes.
This is a democracy. Of course, you know, there should be that opportunity. Yep. I think everyone wins.
Oh, that's a good way of looking at it. Yeah, it's true. But I think as for forecasting it, like I said, I think this is going to bounce all over the place. And it's until you know what the outcome is, it's a little hard to say just who does exactly win or lose.
Thank you, panel. Coming up, white supremacists intend to march up Queen Street before the general election. Who would have thunk clan rallies would be back in vogue this season? Citizen A is back after the break. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Citizen A. We're reviewing the week with blogger Phoebe Fletcher and tweeter David Slack. Issue 3 tonight. White supremacists have flooded Auckland suburbs with anti-Asian pamphlets, and Kyle Chapman is planning a march up Queen Street the day before the general election this year. Is it just me, or did things get very chilly all of a sudden? Phoebe, this is a democracy. You want to march up Queen Street, you've got as much right as anyone. And as distasteful as many of us may think these racists are, they've got a right to do it, haven't they? I know.
So
yeah, I mean, that's the position that Joris de Bries, of course, is in, the Human Rights Commissioner, where he keeps getting complaints, and he's like, oh, you know. And in some sense they do, and in some sense it's good that the debate is generated, because I think it shows to people how racist and idiotic a segment of our population is. I mean, I had that on Close Up last night with Man Ying Ip, where he was saying, you know, Kyle Chapman was saying, look, you know, she's trying to turn us all communist, and and she was just sitting there going, I can't believe how much of an idiot this guy is, you know? Like, to assume that every Chinese person in New Zealand
is a communist,
is you know, stereotypical beyond the extreme. It's actually, it's way out there, it's wacky.
David, when intense economic conditions kill off people's belief in democratic capitalism, they turn to other forms of political legitimacy. We saw the rise of fascism and communism in the 30s, due in part to the crushing impact of crippling economic conditions. When the economy turns, racism jumps, doesn't it?
Well, it does, but it's worth remembering that not every black cloud turns into a tornado, and not every bunch of idiots turns into the Third Reich. You know, there's a lot of circumstances came together in the 30s, not the least of them being the terms of settlement of World War I that were so oppressive to Germany, that meant that so many people were so hard pressed that they were more willing to hear that kind of thing and believe it. Also that it was articulated by people who are rather more smart. I mean, this guy, he puts the rant in ignorant. I mean, he really is an idiot. And Phoebe's right, you put him on TV alongside a reasonable person, and everybody in the country is instinctively going to side with the reasonable person. So, you know, I think in this case, sunlight is the best disinfectant. So walking all the way up Queen Street, no bikes, just a few boobs, you know. Maybe it's not a bad thing.
Question to both of you. At what point is this a failure of political leadership in New Zealand? Many New Zealanders are cautious of replacing the Washington consensus that none of us consented to with a Beijing consensus that none of us consent to. The lack of political leadership has left Kyle with a ripe breeding ground, hasn't it?
I think, you know, there are a few issues at play here. Like in cultural studies, we would say that within kind of ideologies or the way that discourse operates within a society, there can be residual, which is sort of lying beneath the surface, ideologies. You can have emergent ideologies like the discourse of kind of human rights and globalizations, and a kind of dominant ideology within a society, which of course is the kind of ideas which a group most agrees upon. I think in some ways, you know, this sort of racism against the Chinese is a result of, you know, basically World War II. You've got like this kind of underlying, you know, history of discourse beneath the surface in New Zealand. And I mean, this kind of applies as well to in terms of the sales of farms and so on. I know we disagree on this subject, but there are so many items in your everyday existence that come from many other countries around the world where people are treated poorly. Okay, so if you look at, for example, your cell phone, your computer, your DVD player, 80% of the mineral coltan comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, which of course is, you know, known as the world's capital of rape, and is where there's child soldiers and fighting. Okay, if you're buying chocolate, you know, 70% of that came from Cote d'Ivoire, and of course was backing Gbagbo. So all of these, you know, big companies. So in some ways, I think this is a result of, you know, a particular kind of discourse of imperialism, and also a fear about the shifting economic order with the rise of China and India, and that the US is on the decline at the moment.
Is it a failure of leadership?
I feel awful when somebody reminds me of what I'm in denial about. You're absolutely right. You know, I mean, 1 billion people are starving, and you know, we live in a world that's capable of sustaining everybody on the planet. We don't. We enjoy material goods on the back of somebody's suffering, as you say. And Jesus, if you start breaking it down, you realise that we have an enormous problem to deal with. But your question,
the lack of political leadership, has it left a place for Kyle?
Yeah, I mean, this is a do-nothing government that doesn't provide any kind of leadership of any kind, either on economic transformation or moral probity either. I mean, for whatever else you want to say about Helen Clark, she was pretty good on setting some keynote points about where the country stood on moral issues. Now, having said that, she signed the free trade agreement with China.
Exactly. She was the one who opened it up.
But you know, I think you are better to be engaging and negotiating about moral issues than pretending they don't exist and simply trading.
Quick question to both of you. Can blatant racism actually succeed in a cosmopolitan city like Auckland? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it can. Okay, like maybe, you know, what is it, 40% of Auckland's population are migrants anyway, so obviously not with them. But if you look at the BNP at the moment, or if you look at France, where you've got their equivalent of the National Front candidate actually polling higher than Sarkozy. I mean, I think in some ways it points out a kind of double standard. Like if you look at kind of the fuss and the furore around you know, Islam within a nation like ours, but then I log on to Trade Me and see like the roaring trade and Nazi propaganda that's constantly going on. You know, arguably both of these movements are equally as destructive to having a society where everyone can live with each other.
Can racism work in a cosmopolitan city?
Well, I look at places like New York, which is the crossroads of the world, and I see more tolerance there than I see anywhere. I think the more genuinely cosmopolitan you are, it's
more difficult, isn't it?
I think it is. Now, that's not to say that New York, for example, hasn't had many instances of racial tension, generation after generation. It's not sweetness and light, but you need to have that great diversity and the sheer power of the place, and I suppose a kind of arrangement that means it's in everybody's interest to engage with everybody else.
And actually, work together. Okay, let's wrap the show with last word. Phoebe, your last word this week is?
My last word would have to be on John Key and the SAS and the whole John Stevenson debacle.
Disgusting,
I think that citing a text message, Mr. Key, is a really slack excuse and way of dealing with the issue of detainees. I'd be really interested in the international law around this, because I believe actually holding people to hand them over for torture constitutes an international human rights violation, and I think there needs to be a lot closer examination of this. If our SAS are in Afghanistan, they need to be there for humanitarian projects. I don't necessarily agree with having them. I don't agree with having them in Afghanistan in the first place, but certainly they should not be handing detainees over for torture.
David, your final word?
My final word is fulsome, as used by John Key after coming out from lunch with the Queen and saying he was quite full. It was fulsome. A fulsome. The man is embarrassing. The man is embarrassing, and when you look at the Hard Talk interview and his squirming at the experience of his first hard interview in 3 years, you realise that this is a man well out of his depth.
What were they doing letting me on the BB bloody sea?
I'm quite fulsome of him.
Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you, David. Ladies and gentlemen, to my final word. Key had to smile and wave for the first 3 years of his term to build up the political trust from the sleepy hobbits with Me Too Labour light policy, and then in the second term you get the full creamy taste of hard right economics. Shy of Volk, still in the headlights of Key's vacant aspiration charm, won't see it coming. But the fact this government have rammed through more legislation under urgency in almost quarter of a century shows National have nothing but contempt for democratic oversight, and the vast list of civil liberty rollbacks equates to the largest reversal of your legal rights minus any mainstream media focus whatsoever. The power to demand your DNA for merely being arrested, the power to demand your DNA on mere suspicion, the power to deny you a jury trial, the power to force court trials by TV screen, the power to break into your home and plant spy cameras and spy on you for 3 days without a warrant, the power to expand surveillance to all government agencies, the power to deny you your legal representation of your choosing, the power to remove independent legal representation, the power to remove the right to silence. All of this has been rammed through under John Key's government on top of massive public service cutbacks alongside an agenda to privatise our assets as a response to a global economic recession caused by unregulated free market greed. Despite all of this, the sleepy hobbits of New Zealand are still asleep. You get the government you deserve. P.S. I don't have a problem with white supremacists marching up Queen Street the day before the general election this year. This is a democracy. Just understand, Kyle, that I and many other Aucklanders will also be there to counter-protest your ugly, dirty, vicious and divisive racist bullshit, because that's our democratic right as well. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Citizen Bomber Facebook page. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.